Bhante Dhyan Yoga Nugata Pasyan Devatma Shaktim Svagunayar Nagudam Yaha Karanani Nikilani Tani Kalatma Yuktanya Adidishtat Yekaha. Practicing the yoga of meditation, the ancient seers of India saw the divine Shakti energy existing in everything and flowing everywhere. And though veiled by her own modes of nature, she was nevertheless one and indivisible. And she had been incomprehensible earlier, only due to the limitations of their own intellects. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Yaresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadja Akanda Rupa Stiti Reva Moksho Brahma Dvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Satina. Om Satyena Labhyastapasa Hyesa Atma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nityam Antaha Sharirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shubraha Yam Pashanti Atayaha Kshina Doshaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The Atman, the indivisible self within all beings, all things, is realized by moderation, by continence, by knowledge, and by veracity, all of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, existing in everything, even here, in this very body. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvo Vahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. And so we enter into our final event of this, my Dharma visit to Portland, after this 3-week period where we started off with a wonderful 3-day retreat in Seattle. And we talked about this oddity in our consciousness called the curtain of nescience, or sometimes the Buddhists call it the cloud of unknowing. And we took it apart in a very knowing fashion. We finally found some references to it in the scriptures, and based on that and the teachings of our gurus and our own direct experience, we looked into the consistency of the curtain of nescience. We also looked at the lokas, the nadis, and the transmigration of souls, this sort of dream stream of consciousness that we're all involved in. Sankalpa, they call it in Sanskrit. How it moves through subtle nerves, just like blood and energy moves through the gross nerves of the body. And you then look deeper into those kingdoms of heaven within you, and you'll find that souls are transmigrating along channels, nerve channels, nadis they're called. And what's being carried along those nerves is the mind complex, basically, the mental complex with its stored up karmas. And so we look at these beautiful teachings in accordance with the cloud of nescience. We find out many things about our predicament here in Maya. Or if we have thinned out the curtain of nescience, and we have uncovered the kingdoms of heaven within us, and we can go there in our deepest contemplations, then maybe we're not living in Maya at all. We find out that illusion is rather illusory. It's illusory illusion. And we find out that our delusions, too, are easy to transcend if we bring the light of consciousness in. Or, as Ram Prasad sang to us, one day I awoke and my delusion was gone, utterly gone. He couldn't remember what it was like to be in ignorance, as if some veil had been lifted again. And so the Seattle retreat proved to be very efficacious for all of us who are working on that level of trying to pierce through the cloud of nescience, or the curtain of nescience. Thin it out at least so we can get some light, like the light of deep sleep, what happens to us in deep sleep behind that curtain of nescience. And everything that's stored within us in form of unmanifested prakriti, from the most ancient of Indian teachings, and Krishna's teachings too, about the unmanifested nature of everything. And then the supremely unmanifested will become seen by us, that is, the unchanging, that which doesn't transmigrate, that which doesn't involve itself or participate in this dream stream of awareness. And we also looked at some causes for the lack of spiritual success. And we then more recently, and brought that teaching forward to the classes yesterday and last weekend, the idea of the disappearance of ignorance, how it actually dissipates when we bring the light of practice in. Our business really to be at the practice, just do the practice and not worry too much about resisting evil. Just let it go away as you water the flowers and take water away from the weeds, and just watch this perfect inherent self of mankind come to the fore, because it's been covered over by not only this curtain of nescience, which is a very primal thing in us, but karmas and actions that are unresolved, and those being on the individual, collective, and cosmic level too. There's nothing we can really do about the overlay of the cosmic mind. It's most pure. That's about what most we can say about it. Hiranyagarbha, and that's actually the sloka we ended off yesterday, states that in chapter 5 of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, sloka 2, he says, that Brahman alone presides over nature in all aspects and controls every form and every cause of production. It witnesses the birth of the firstborn seer of golden color, and nourishes that one with wisdom, with highest wisdom. So to witness the birth of the archetypical soul is a platform or a station that's far beyond anything that has to do with form. It's a detached witness. So Hiranyagarbha would be the ancient word we'd probably use for that. So we chant Hiranmayi Parikoshi Virajan Brahmanishkalam, that light of the firstborn, which is most sattvic, almost trans-sattvic, in which we identify with, and we're identifying with the great sages and seers, avatars, and Ishvara form, our ideals, our chosen ideals. And so that takes us to the Son, and through that we can get to the Father. Now, in our tradition, we'd say it takes us to the daughter, to that Shakti power, which we just chanted about. Devatma Shakti Svagunayar Nagudam, although this divine energy, this mother wisdom, in which nourishes the firstborn, coming straight out of Brahman, the Absolute, nevertheless remains unveiled, completely revealed to that one at that time, and also to the seers who engage in the Jnana Yoga, the yoga of meditation. And so, this being the 6th day of Navaratri, that is Divine Mother worship, wherein last night we had our 3-hour puja to Durga, and offered garlands and leis and flowers and mantras and 10-article worship to her, in knowledge of worshiping the deities in a non-dual state of mind. Remember that teaching from yesterday's class? It was one of those precepts that the seer keeps in mind all the time at the march from lower truth to higher truth. When you reach higher truth, the level of Vigyan, rather than Gyan or Agyan, then all of a sudden you're aware of worshipping the deities continues, but it's done in a non-dual state of mind. That is where principles and deities come together and connect, the connecting point being the mantra. Then you have this non-dual state of mind, although it appears dual. That is, you might say, non-duality working in the world. And there you can understand Adhyatma Shakti, how she comes into and apparently moves and flows through all things, yet remains ever stationary in you as the witness. So that sloka too is very well put, isn't it? She witnesses the birth of the firstborn seer of golden color and nourishes him with highest wisdom. That one sloka alone is adequate means for meditating for a month or two, just to inspire the mind and to make it aware of the immaculate and complete nature of divine reality. Now, in the slokas we read yesterday, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we also came upon this idea of the cosmic form as the manifested Brahman. The rishis were very kind and very considerate to the world, a little bit different than the ascetics might be. They said, basically, there is this Saguna Brahman and this Nirguna Brahman. There's everything you see, taste, touch, hear, and smell, and everything in your dream. All the worlds you create out of the 5 gross and subtle elements, and you experience with your 5 gross and 5 subtle senses, is all the Saguna aspect of Brahman. That's why you can chant later in the Upanishads, as I just did, Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukjaresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagad Cha, where the Vedanta concludes that all this is Brahman, whether it's outer or inner, or transcendent. In fact, why not just call it outer sometimes, inner sometimes, and transcendent ultimately? Because that's what happens to you every day in your 24-hour period, is waking, dreaming, and deep sleep is outer, inner, and transcendent, isn't it? It's just that that transcendent state of deep sleep has not quite been seen by you yet because of the thickness of that curtain of nescience, because of those karmas, because of those impositions that you are still trying to pierce through. So I read that beautiful story about Sri Ramakrishna's meditation. He felt like he was digging away with a nail knife, and causing a kind of opening in that curtain of nescience. And they said as he dug more, it's like sand and dirt rushed in to fill it as he kept digging. But as he kept digging more and more, finally he created a big opening. And then this light came flooding through. And how Holy Mother had that same experience sitting in meditation as she did for hours a day and doing hundreds and thousands of repetitions of the japa for her students every day. Japaharini, she's called. She all of a sudden felt the light of Brahman just come at her like an ocean and wash over her, and for days she was in a blissful state. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi had taken over this precious form of the Divine Mother. So if we look in terms of these slokas in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, we find out that Brahman is manifested and unmanifested both, and that's what these first 4 slokas are really telling us. In the first one we heard that ignorance leads to the perishable, wisdom leads to immortality, but beyond them both and different from them is the imperishable Supreme Brahman, in whom exists wisdom as well as ignorance. It'd be rather a hard philosophical point to make that ignorance exists in Brahman, wouldn't it? But Sri Ramakrishna said Maya exists in Brahman like poison exists in the snake, but the snake is never affected by it. Or good and bad smells pass on the air, but the air is never affected by them. It just carries them for a little while, and then they go away. So we have to, as long as we're in form, sort of acknowledge that this shifting state of awareness that we're a party to and a part of has those different aspects. And if we can identify them, then of course we can detach from them and have the experience of the, like she did, of the imperishable Brahman. Call it here infinite, imperishable, secret, entirely different from the manifested and the unmanifested. Really a teaching going all the way back to the Gita and Sri Krishna. Then we read about the sloka I just gave you, that Brahman witnesses the birth of the firstborn, of golden hue, Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic egg, sometimes they call that, out of which everything else will come. It's really the cosmic mind, or Mahat in Samkhya, called Lord Brahma in Vedic times. So you have different names that you can assign for that firstborn. Primeval or archetypical soul, firstborn, the creator of the worlds. And Brahman doesn't do the creating, so it has to have a sort of hub, you see, which will do the creating for it, and that's the combination of Brahma and Shakti. And then this sloka that's leading us more toward the teachings I want to get to today, differentiating each genus into its species and each species into its members, the Supreme Being withdraws them once more into their own ground. Again, bringing forth the agents of creation, the Great Self holds sway over them all. And finally, in Sloka 4 we read, just as the sun shines, lighting up space above, below, and across, even so does the one adorable God, the repository of all goodness and greatness, preside over everything, everything that has the nature of a cause. So this word is very important. Cause and effect is basically karma. Desha, kala, and nimitta. Nimitta is that cause and effect that's going on all the time. Now, that ushers us into this chart I wanted to show you and look at today. Because remember, these charts on the Brahma Chakra and the mighty river of Brahman we've already taken in Chapter 2. I was just bringing them back to try and illustrate some of the teachings in these first three slokas. But if you're doing that for your homework next time, or we might get to some of it a little later today, we want to look at this Eastern way of viewing things, because in our Western science and our Western psychology and our westernized conventional religion, we're looking at cause and effect as more happening only outside of ourselves. That is, morality, for instance, is an outside happening of cause and effect. If you do a good act, you reap a bad act, and it's all based on actions outside. And science and physics, so forth, one object hitting against another object, you see, and then that causes that to move. And so they're studying the cause and effect of objects coming in contact with each other, like they say, mosquitoes colliding in dense gases, you see, in the earliest of times. What happens to those bodies when a certain impact? There's a story of Swami Vivekananda where he was walking with an English woman through a meadow, and they jumped a fence and walked across a pasture, and this bull saw them and came running at them. And the woman was quite shocked and sort of motionless, and so Swami just pushed her behind him and stood there like this in his classic pose, and the bull came right up to him and stopped just a few feet before him, and then snorted a little bit and looked at this essence of ahimsa standing in front of him, and then walked away. So the woman asked him later, well, what was that about? And he said, well, yeah, I don't have any fear of animals and fear of things. But what was going on in my mind was when that object weighing some 500 to 800 pounds came upon my body weighing about 200 pounds and hit it, how far would my body fly after the contact was made? So he was busy making this kind of calculation in his mind and wasn't thinking anything about pain or fear. So that kind of calculation is there, particularly in the Western mind. However, in Vivekananda's mind, of course, he knows cause and effect to be happening on a much deeper and subtler level. So that's what this chart is about. It kind of maps out these levels: emotional, mental, psychological, intellectual, philosophical, and spiritual. Again, some 6 levels to your consciousness in this rendering, and all interconnected to, they have overlaps. It's not like you can compartmentalize them conveniently, as they say, but we can take them apart for the purposes of espying our karma and how karma happens on the inside, because great beings like Dalai Lama have told us, when the West looks seriously into the teachings of karma and reincarnation, then especially this level of our being will become cleared up, and we'll be able to solve all our problems. The emotional level is very big for people nowadays in the West, in case you haven't noticed. TV's full of it, and newspapers are full of it, and media and war, and all the psychotherapy is big. Everyone has to have their therapist, and so there's a lot of emotional trauma going on in people. And you know that when you come to Buddhist and Vedantic schools and schools like that, if you're like that, they take one look at you and say, you should probably go back to the world and work that out a bit, because you're not going to understand these teachings. They're not going to really help you. So we've had to make concessions for that, just like Lord Vashishta did when Lord Brahma sent him here. The firstborn sent one of his mind-born sons to earth and said to him, basically, you'll find 3 or 4 kinds of people there. You'll find people who are absolutely antagonistic to what you're teaching. They'll revile you, they'll crucify you, they'll try and poison you. And then you'll find people who are not at all interested, or completely into the worldly, period. And then you'll find beings who are beginning to seek, and to them you want to give out this precious teaching of the 4 treasures and the 6 jewels, how to gain viveka and vairagya, discrimination and detachment, and then inner peace, self-control, forbearance, contentment, faith, and the ability to concentrate on God alone. Seek thee first the kingdom. And then finally, this desire for liberation, mumukshutvam. One of my favorite swamis in India that I like very much is Swami Mumukshananda. If he's watching live stream for some reason, I salute you. So that leads to a pure desire for liberation, something that you cannot forget. It's not like a sudden awakening where you say, oh, I think I'll renounce the world now, and 2 days later you find a job, as Sri Ramakrishna said. So Vashishta had to go and find those people who are ready for that, and give them the 6 jewels. And then he said, you'll find a 4th kind of people. That's the seer. There are some seers there on earth. There's nothing you can do for them. There's nothing you need to do for them. They're fine. They're there like you, trying to find a way to help people. As Ramakrishna said, you don't whitewash a wall inlaid with mother of pearl. And it's basically, they don't need any sort of teachings. They already are aware of it, and they're about their Father's business. So in that rendering, we see that this mind-born son can come among us and teach us about cause and effect on a very subtle level, because we're thinking of it only physically, or scientifically maybe. So if we come to the emotional level, we find that people are suffering, then what can Vedanta do about that? It wants to take you to the mind, because the mind is the seat of delusion. For instance, look up here, if I can find it quickly. There. This philosophical level of effect, cause and effect, seeds doubt and inadvertence in the mind. And it I can't see it there, but basically it says that somewhere there, that it focuses concentration on the mind instead of the soul. There it is. fixes awareness on mind rather than the soul. So there's a place where a person can give up the physical body and not be so attached to that and just have the body move about. He'd then know more how a body lives and goes. Its task is done. Let karma float it down, as Vivekananda said. And then if a person just moves and karma just floats the body down eventually, and the Lord occupies the body and then gives it up, then finally you come to this ability to access the mind. Really, the kingdoms of heaven within you are the mind, and the brain is something different. When you come to the mind, it's a field of consciousness, as the father of yoga says. And this field of consciousness is seeded with various vrittis, vibrations. So you get to a very specific kind of location there where you can trace the cause, the effects of causes in your own mind. And then it becomes an open book for you. You know where to work on your consciousness. A lot of people want to work on themselves, but they don't know where to go to work on it. So Vedanta and Buddhism and those schools would, mind-only schools, would take you to that level of working on the mind and then watch the mental and the psychological and the emotional problems just dissolve. And pretty much watch your diseases dissolve too. Because if all diseases begin in the mind, as Lord Vashishta said, then if you cure the cause of the disease in the mind, then the body starts to emanate greater health. There are several slokas in the Upanishad that state that. You get a better voice, you get a clearer energy, clearer complexion, and various things like that. And the mind is able to concentrate on reality rather than on itself. So look at some of the bullet points there at the emotional level. That is, effects of ignorant action ignite anger and other passions at a very base level. So your inability to control your anger, letting go and venting it, of course, just lets out more grounds for cause and effect. So screaming into a pillow isn't going to be ultimately that good for that cause of your anger. It might give you a little steam valve kind of release, but basically it's going to store up again, and you haven't really gotten to the cause of the thing. One of my students, long time ago, unnamed, had joined Alcoholics Anonymous and had given up drinking for some 8 or 9 years, and went to a party one night and had a drink, and that was it. It was all over, and she was back on the alcoholism. So looking back on it just purely from a teaching level, you see that the desire for drinking was not eradicated in the mind, and so eventually it worked its way in a cycle, as everything does, back out to the surface, and had to deal with it. Another student of mine had an addiction to a certain substance, got so fed up with it and disgusted with it, gave it up and never went back to it again. So looking at those two scenarios, those two case scenarios from the standpoint of an observer, you see that there's some root in the mind, some samskara and karmic root in the mind that is still there. And if you don't want it to come up in some adverse circumstance with some horrible effect, potentially horrible effect, then you want to get to it early and diffuse it, disintegrate it. And that's what sadhana does for you. So rather than sort of just locating it through therapy or something and saying, oh, and identifying with it possibly, running the dangers of that, instead you say, let me see where it originated, and then I'll bring my practice forward. My practice is going to be on all levels to get at it. Devotional level means, like last night, the greatest austerity for the body, Sri Krishna says in the Gita, is worship. You bow your head down to the altar, you offer flowers and incense and pour out your heart's love. And as the heart's love gets poured out, maybe some of these emotional problems do too, you see. And they get poured out in the light of consciousness, in the light of the divine image, in the light of your own devotion, coupled with the deity. And so bhakti would be one of the things you would bring to destroy emotional level problems. Also jnanam, studying, because this might be new news to somebody who comes to class. See, I mean, there are 12 of us here. We are the 12 apostles of Christ. See, here we are again. So, to anyone coming into the holy company like that, then this might be new news to them. Say, oh, now I know what to do to get rid of that persistent problem that's been plaguing me most of my life, and which has been interrupting my otherwise pure state of bliss and contentment, peace, my peace of mind. It's been getting at my peace of mind. And so I can't keep it constant, and if I can't keep it constant, I can't get into meditation. If I can't get into meditation, I'll never have samadhi. So, emotional problems like anger and other passions will get taken up by sadhana, including meditation itself. And of course, even karma yoga. And karma yoga basically can work out anger, can't it? And if you feel pent up, you go out and do some service to someone and the anger gets dissipated. And if you blend karma yoga then with knowledge, jnana, and devotion and meditation, then ignorance has no problem. You see, it poses no problem to you. It has no way of getting in. For instance, like Ram Prasad singing, or I'm sorry, Kamala Kanta singing. Where do those flowers come from? Shristi stiti laya hai te hai, Shristi stiti laya hai te hai. Shristi stiti laya hai te hai, Shristi stiti laya hai te hai, Kalina Hulini Vedin Shukir Vashana Karo Arkadin, Shukir Vashana Karo Arkadin. Excuse my early morning voice. He says, it's time to heed the mother's minstrel, who declares that all illusions and all problems will be destroyed by chanting Mother's name. So there's where the intensity of bhakti can penetrate through and show one to the source of their problem. And then we can eradicate it by our attention. You see, if you can't locate it, then you can't send a force at it. Force of knowledge, force of meditation. So you locate it and do away with it. And in that regard, you see here, the next problem would be attachment. It breeds attachment to weakness and pity. That is, the effects of ignorant action come about. And we know we should be able to crush the stars to atoms and unhinge the universe. That's the kind of strength that Swami Vivekananda wants us to have. We have to be able to declare that we are the children of God. We are the children of the Mother. Also, heightens a false sense of security in us. This cause and effect, when it comes out as good karmas, then basically you feel like everything is okay with the world, that the world is my oyster. And then, as we studied yesterday, a little light of sattva comes to us. And the tamasic cycles and the rajasic cycles, that is restlessness and laziness, go away for a little while, and we have a sattvic period. And it heightens a sense of false security in us, and then we lose that balance again somewhere along the way, in deep sleep, or because of some circumstances that happen to us in our life. We lose our job or something. We lose a loved one, and then all of a sudden we're very put upon, and the cause of these things come up again, and we find out that we weren't as strong as we thought we were. So this false sense of security needs to be removed, and a practical, sobering stance in the bedrock of spirit needs to be maintained, established and maintained, instead of living in false hope or sense of security. So one takes a good deep look at oneself and one's practice every day in meditation, and knows the nature of relativity and the nature of reality both. Finally, the bullet point at the emotional level, the final one, is increases the tendency of oversensitivity. So, of course, the emotional level is triggered by that. You're too sensitive, or you're too reactionary, reactive. You react to every little thing. So, of course, the teachings of yoga are very effective there, and Patanjali makes no secret about it, that things will happen to you. You should chant the name of Kali, that song I was just singing. You should chant the name of Kali in all circumstances, but even if negativities come to you, continue to chant the name of Kali, as that will destroy all illusion in the end. It'll go deep. So some people's samskaras and karmas are thicker, the curtain of nescience is thicker, and other people's are thinner, you see, and they've been working at it for lifetimes, and they're about to make a big hole with a nail knife in that curtain, as Ramakrishna said, and let some light in. So that oversensitivity is based on reaction to things that happen to you. Things will happen to you anyway. They happen to saints and seers, don't they? You must have read their lives. They've had some very horrific things happen to them, but the proof of their fidelity and their stableness, their stability, is that they don't react to them when they happen, and then they just pass. So the emotional level has been completely purified in them. In fact, sometimes they're blamed for being too sterile looking and acting. Why aren't you reacting to that? See, I can't get you to argue with me. So basically they're very set in a very even-minded way, like upeksha. They have that equanimity of mind in spades, and they're not going to deviate from that. Just look at the mental level. It causes obsession with matter and objects. What does? The effects of ignorant action. I mean, cause and effect going on at the mental level. So basically, as we were saying, the teaching again in yoga is aparigraha. The outer teaching is, don't receive gifts. The next level of the teaching is, because they have strings attached. The next level of the teaching, which is most important, is that by receiving gifts and giving gifts, you're taking away the mind's ability to concentrate on your spiritual life. You're becoming attached to objects, and you forget your past lifetimes. If you forget your past lifetimes, then you don't know where you came from. You don't know the cause and effect for your chain of births and deaths. So, as Ramakrishna said, live enough lifetimes like that without knowing your source and the cause of things, then you're just born again and again in ignorance. That's the samsaric wheel, the fodder that feeds the samsaric wheel. So aparigraha, non-receiving of gifts, means your attention is being taken away from your ability to concentrate on meditation, on the spirit and soul. And if you do concentrate long enough for that, you'll remember your past lifetimes, and you'll see the cause and effect of your existences, and then you'll be free. It'll be a main turning point in your inner spiritual life when you catch a glimpse of that. He says, Shrishti Sthiti Laya Hai Te Hai. Shrishti Sthiti is creation and sustenance, you see. And Laya is dissolution. So if I can see the creation, preservation, and destruction cycles that are going on in terms of my emotional level, my mental level, my psychological level, then I can finally identify the ultimate cause to all effects. And I can offer everything back into it. You see, here, Lord Brahma, I finally found you. Take all of your creation back. I'm very impressed by it, I can tell you. But I'm done with it. I've had my bath, and I'm clean. Let me out of the tub. So, otherwise, if you don't let me out of the tub, I get wrinkled. And you know what that means, right? Old age. I experience old age over and over again, and that's no fun. So, the mental level, this penchant for matter and objects, removes the mind's natural ability to concentrate on the indivisible nature of the soul, which again occurs, like I said, up there. It causes one to fixate with the mind instead of the soul. That's the problem of the intellectual. The next bullet point is that it increases mental imbalance and delusion. We know that the mind is a very subtle mechanism. Holy Mother said it's like the screw. You take a screw out and then you put it back in, and it runs in opposite direction. So the mind of a man is like a screw, she says. You just turn it or twist it, and it may get off balance and won't go down its same old channel again. And so that kind of problem of mental imbalance is even a problem when you do too much spiritual practice, she says. If you sit for your hour meditation in the morning, and you don't feel inclined to meditate, and everything you try fails, then you should not leave your seat. Chanchala vritti, you should not let that vibration come where I should leave my seat. You just pick up a scripture or a holy book and read it, and finish out your hour meditation. So too much japa, too much meditation and so forth can imbalance a person's mind. So it's not just thinking upon the world too much that's a problem. There's the other extreme. Didn't we just chant, the Atman is revealed by moderation, by continence, by the middle path, for most beings. Of course, there are some extreme cases, some ascetics that can force the issue. At that mental level, it also exacerbates the problem of arrogance. Pride and arrogance are the ego's penchant. That is, one side of the ego is inflation, and the other side of the ego is lack of self-worth. And so, again, a moderate approach is enjoined at first until one can mature the ego. Apakvahamkara, it's unripe. And then as one practices, it becomes pakvahamkara and begins to ripen. The ego will naturally disappear at that time. You don't have to force the issue. Otherwise, the problem of arrogance is there, and pride of learning and so forth. Then that is beginning to, again, overlap on the psychological level of things, which we're getting to. It also strengthens the bond of duality. There's a beautiful song, I always think of it when I think of the word duality, by Tulsidas. Itani vinati raghunandan se dukha dandva hamara bitauji. Itani vinati raghunandan se dukha dandva hamara bitauji. 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 Itani vinati raghunandana se. Dukha dvandva, he says that over and over again. The pairs of opposites, the contrasting pairs of opposites. Dukkha and sukha, happiness and sorrow. He says basically, oh Ram, because he's singing to his ideal, this golden firstborn. He says, oh Ram, please destroy my mind's penchant to perceive duality everywhere. Because only reality exists. Nothing else exists. There's a beautiful devotional song that has that rare admittance and actually demonstration of non-duality being the core, the real core issue. That in the presence of beings like Ram and Sita and Krishna and Radha and so forth, you'll feel bliss. You'll feel bliss. But if you get away from them, and you get away from Ishvara and you come down into your old life and your old mind and your old world again, then those samskaras and karmas might come back to you. So he wants his penchant to perceive dualities as being real, to be entirely wiped out. And so he can just come to rest, these things. I must come to rest at the feet of Ram, is how he puts it later in the song. So that strengthens the bond of duality in us, and we want it thinned out, that curtain of nescience. The curtain of nescience is made of what? Fear, doubt, ignorance, and brooding on all three of those. So Lord Shiva says, the seers have declared that the curtain of nescience consists of fear, doubt, and ignorance, and it's strengthened by your brooding on those three. So you have some deep root causes for that curtain of nescience being there. Remember, it's also at a cosmic level, so it's not something you could say, be gone. As long as Lord Brahma's in the process of creation, preservation, and destruction, Srishti Sthiti Laya, then it's going to be there in some level. It's just going to be more sattvic at that level. And that's a good springboard for you to rise to. But nevertheless, you have this curtain of delusion persisting at the collective level of humanity, and I would say not just humanity, but the ancestors, because they're very much involved in the rounds of birth and death. And probably even the suras and asuras, or the celestials. So you have that persisting there, but then of course your own real responsibility is your individual mind, your individual karma. And that you need to get to, because you can get free of humans, ancestors, animals, plants, worlds, nature even, like Lord Buddha did. You could get koivalya and divorce the thing, see? Get in isolation of anything insentient and just see and rest in your own soul perfectly, in pure sentiency. That's an experience that, of course, is at the height or the deepest depths behind the curtain of nescience, or transcendence of the curtain of nescience. So, on the individual level, then, we have that need to thin out our belief in the reality of dual world. Vaichitra, the Tantrists has called it, too many varieties are pressing in on my mind. I should try and reduce these down to one. Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayan Sanmatram Anandaganam, massive bliss, Vibhavayam, Samahita San Bahir, outer, Antaram, inner, Va. Kalam Nayetaha Sati Karma Bande. Kalam, time, Sata Karma Bande, burn my karmas. It's pretty well put. It's pretty direct. That I should take this outer and I should take this inner and I should render them into one state, because that's what it is. And then once I've rendered it into one state, I must meditate on it. Then pass your time contentedly. Don't forget the meditation in between. It's going to be hard to pass your time contentedly and be free if you haven't meditated on the fact that the outer and the inner are one thing. I mean, this is out of some of the most ancient slokas, and this is where the teachings of form is formlessness and formlessness is form came, and all of these later ideas about it. It was very well put and very well wrought in the scriptures by these ancient beings. Drishya means seer. I should be the seer of this process of outer and inner, instead of being swept into it. Because when I'm swept into it, then cause and effect happens to me by these effects that I've gone on. What are the effects? Fear, doubt, and ignorance. And why can't I get to the source of them? Because I'm brooding on them all the time. Brooding is the worst waste of time, bar none. So it all plays back here, doesn't it, into the reactivity of the soul. Things happen to you, you react to them, and then you brood on them, isn't it? So what if things happen to you, you let them go, and you didn't brood on them? And then maybe you could find the source of the curtain of nescience back inside you and begin to thin it out. Because basically doubt is doubt of fear. Fear is fear of death. That's at the root of things. Fear that I don't exist is at the root of the curtain of nescience. Then the next root is fear of formlessness. I actually have a fear of going formless because I'm so convinced that I'm a form. It doesn't sound like the seers to me, the highest realization, nirvikalpa, nirvana, and so forth. And then other fears come forward from that, as we saw from that chart on the curtain of nescience. And the same with doubt. There's a doubt of my being formlessness. There's a doubt of my being existent or non-existent. It's not just that, I've made a conclusion that I'm a material person and that the world is real. I can make that conclusion, but am I going to get any rest there? Or I'm going to start doubting once in a while, well, maybe the world isn't real. Or maybe I'm not just a body. You see, so no matter which way you play it, you have doubt and fear coming in. You can't rest anywhere in the body. So there's always a fly in the ointment and a grain of sand in the bed, as the songs sing. So I must make a apt and final conclusion, like the Vedanta has, that all this is Brahman, by rendering the internal and the external into one thing, meditating on it, seeing it as one, then seeing the one who's seeing it. And then I can pass my time contentedly and be free. That's supreme contentment. It's beyond sukha and dukkha, happiness and sorrow. Contentment is penultimate to peace, and peace to the peace that passes all understanding. And then we get an idea of what non-dual reality these great beings are resting in, are abiding in, and they never move. Let's go on to the psychological level. The first bullet point there is that these effects of ignorant action invite dalliance with the illusory perceptions. They invite dalliance with the illusory perceptions. You're always entertaining these sankalpas, these dreams, these fantasies, these desires. And as you run them out, they're cyclic and they don't satisfy you in the end. So my teacher always gave that teaching, or that lecture once a year, satiation never comes. And he would always start it out saying, you're following the Bhoga Marga, people, Westerners. You want to follow the Jnana Marga, get off the Bhoga Marga. Path of Bhoga, enjoyment, will not satiate you. Satiation never comes. So at this level of psychological, then it becomes rather a mode of the collective mind, doesn't it, of society, that all these things are good life. They're what you must go after. These are the things that you really should seek. So it's all very conventional. And look how it's rooted in conventional religion, going after money for the church and getting rich and so forth. How so different than the way Christ lived. Or the conventional psychology, the one lifetime scenario of the gods of psychology in the West, Freud and Jung, who never had an Oriental person on their therapy table because they worked in Europe only. Or the conventional science that's talking about quantum physics as if it's some solution based on its scattering of particles changing at a billionth of a second. Sounds like building your house on sand to me. And Christ wasn't the only one who said that. Thousands of years previous to him, they had words for shifting sands. Matra, anam, other words in Sanskrit that talking about the minutest atomic particle. So to build your house more on the bedrock of the spirit then is to begin to get at these misconceptions that you're holding, these illusory conceptions, and eradicating them and being free. Thinking in a very high vein, lofty vein. Entertaining some, what may seem to you to be some non-conventional ideas at first, and putting them on and wearing them and trying them out, and see if that fear of you being formless doesn't just go away eventually, and all of a sudden you're welcoming. Dalai Lama said to me once in person, we Tibetans look forward to the day of our death. And was it Chief Joseph, or one of the great chiefs, said, it's a good day to die. So basically this idea of sloughing off the form must not be such a big issue to some people. They've been here, done that, and then you can take on and put on and slough off as many bodies as you want. Bodies are produced from the mind. So there is why the mental and psychological level is so important, and why people are having inferior bodies, inferior births, bodies that age too quick, too early, bodies that are defective and have many diseases, all coming from the mental apparatus on down, because the mind produces the bodies. it's a different way of thinking than saying, sperm, ovum, fetus, birth, growth, death. It's called the physical cause of things, material cause of things. But there are at least 6 or 7 other causes beyond the physical, all the way to the most remote cause of all, which is Om. Let's see, the word. That's the most remote of all causes. It's the first cause of everything. And that is the word of the Creator God. It's really the formless word too. Both Brahman and Brahma share that word, but for different purposes. For Brahman, it's, I will dissolve everything back into the Absolute via the word. For Brahma, it's everything is spilling out from my usage of the world into the various levels of creation, or projection might be a better word. So depending on which way you're headed, is the in or out. Or maybe you have successfully rendered everything into one indivisible state and you're not heading anywhere anymore. Like Ramana Maharshi say, they keep saying, I'm dying, but where am I going? I don't understand them. He was very childlike in his dealing with people, telling, well, he's got cancer now, he's not going to be with us longer. But then he would say, I don't understand what you're saying. Where would I go? He's a person who's established. He's Shiva. He's everywhere. And the body is just dropping and forming like waves on the top of an ocean, but an ocean that's changeless at its depths. So really, when you talk about the mental and psychological level, you're getting to real deep causes, aren't you? Things that where you can really shed light on the whole body-mind mechanism. The whole psychophysical being comes into line. And this is what that higher wisdom that you get informed of, that even the great Brahma gets informed of, Hiranyagarbha, from the highest position, as soon as he's going to enter into a cycle of creation, preservation, and destruction. Shristi, Stiti, Lai. All of that information is going to be fed or remembered. And so therefore, we should remember it when we enter into it. That will be the bottom line for us. We should remember our birthless, deathless nature. Never forget, yourself. And so, like I said yesterday, visas, MasterCards, fine, but the spiritual traveler doesn't want to leave home without it. What's that? It, the Atman, knowledge of the indivisible self. Don't leave home without it. Now, here's a problem of the psychological level, is that it advances curiosity in the occult powers. And we've had teachings on that, the difference between the 6 divine powers of Krishna, for instance, and the 8 occult powers that the Hatha yogis go after, and the psychics, and so forth. So we know that occult powers have been eschewed by everyone from Krishna to Ramakrishna. If you have even possession of one of them, you cannot realize God, Krishna says. So that's something at the psychological level that people are very attracted to, and the Westerners too are showing that kind of attraction to it. In fact, I would say science is rather kind of an occult power. It's mixed up with the tricks of prana. It's just that those tricks are being demonstrated before their very eyes in front of an electron microscope. But for the psychic, for the occultist, for those who like seances and contacting the dead and so forth, that very prana has taken on the psychic prana form, and now you're looking at tricks inside, and you're trying to prove or disprove physical laws by the presence of these occult powers that are acting at a whole different level of consciousness. So it's a sidetrack, most of the teachers say. We'd want to stay away from it. So it also causes some very definite ruts and grooves, samskaras, in the psychological body that will be called back to operation when that soul is born again, transmigrates into a new form. So to be free of those kinds of things, would be to die consciously, and then to be reborn consciously would be based on that. So if we're going to admit to cause and effect, or look at it at a deep level, then we probably ought to try and use cause and effect to our greatest advantage, rather than falling at a disadvantage around it all the time, letting it have its way over us. Rather, we should use cause and effect in that positive way, to bring us to the surface, to the top of the cycle of cause and effect, so we may, like Buddha, get out of the river and watch everything pass by. Now, it plays on the false hopes and hidden fears. We've already pretty much talked about that. Fear and doubt and ignorance being the constituency of the curtain of nescience. So the brooding of that, on a psychological level, would play on those very same things and enhance them. And that mula vidya, root ignorance, would become dense and thick, so you couldn't really penetrate it in any given lifetime without some very intense sadhana, some very intense practice. Practice is going to bring you into awareness of the makeup of your karmas and samskaras and the cosmic level, the curtain of nescience, what it consists of, and then you're going to have a much better opportunity of penetrating through, of making a whole and seeing that light behind it. You might go into conscious deep sleep one night. How about that? That's called swapna siddha, getting perfection in a dream. That is, you might have hatat siddha, all of a sudden an immediate awakening, to the illusory nature of the curtain of nescience, and see through it. There are different kinds of perfections like that happen. Swapna siddha, hatat siddha. So this is all based on a causal memory you have, smriti bedu, causal memory you have of being formless. So if the curtain of nescience has a primal fear and a primal doubt around being formlessness, it also carries with it this smriti bedu, this memory of having once entered into samadhi, whether it happened in meditation, or whether it happened at the time of death, or whether it happened when you attained samadhi due to your spiritual practice. There's a memory of that in you, of being formless, of being blissful. So there again, using cause and effect in a higher sense, to awaken the primal cause and effect, and to see through it. Shiva would dance and sing, you see. This Mrityunjaya dance, and say his mantra about the conquering of death, see, when that happened to a soul. Kali would dance and clap her hands. That's what they're waiting for, is for souls to see through the ruse of embodiment. And then they can either never take a body again, or come back to the body in full consciousness. Should a man be reborn? They asked Vivekananda. He said, I certainly hope he will not until he can do so in full consciousness. Where are those souls? Where are those souls who can be born in full consciousness? It must be the Kali Yuga. We're seeing so few of them. So here is our challenge and our opportunity both, is to live a conscious life, die a conscious death, so-called, and see through the illusion, the dreamlike, illusory nature of birth and death, and come back in full consciousness to help others. As far as Holy Mother was concerned, she said, all of you who have taken Ramakrishna, the Kali Avatar, as your ideal, your matters are solved. You'll either go to Ramakrishna Loka, or you'll reach your non-dual state of awareness and dissolve yourself, never to return again. Because birth and death are very painful, she said, you don't want to come back here again. Those who come back, even consciously, will suffer. Birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death are the six billows, or the six transformations. Add in hunger and thirst there, in the Buddhist way of thinking. It's not satiable, you see. You cannot satiate it. You created a monster, as it were. So you're neutralizing of all of these effects of karma is going to be to your greatest advantage. So you can live a dharmic life, and be free. And Holy Mother said along the way, since your matters are solved, then you should turn and help others as you go towards your ultimate enlightenment. Turn and help others on your way. Take some with you. And as I was talking about earlier in the class, it fixes awareness on mind rather than soul. That's the next level of subtlety. When one gets over thinking of the body of the self, then pretty soon, because of the marvelous occult powers and the marvelous sweep of worlds and beings inside that you're seeing, you might become more occupied or preoccupied with the mental apparatus and all that it contains, and forget that ultimate state of reality which is your essence and which you are headed for, an ultimate realization. That's Ramakrishna described that nicely as he moved up the chakras in Kundalini Yoga way of speaking. He said at each chakra there were deities, and they were all inviting him into that loka, into that realm. These are all, again, these nerve channels that are traveling along, and they're all connected to these spiritual vortexes. They're not just, can't think of them just as a human spine and a heart and a throat and a third eye. You have to think of them as inner worlds that are pulsating with Shakti power and prana and souls going here and there in their trajectories, up and down, in and out. And so in that sweep, if you're a spiritual aspirant making a march on the citadels of formlessness, as they say, and to knock down that door of the third eye, in other words, the Rudra Granthi there, Vishnu Granthi here, and Brahma Granthi here, basically you're going to have to penetrate through and awaken the Kundalini, then penetrate beyond the realm of the ancestors, and then penetrate beyond any attachment to form you have at all, which happens there at the Agya chakra, the third eye. So these three granthis are called knots. They are the curtain of nescience itself that we're talking about. One there, one here, just below the heart. Ancestors can't get through it. You can't transcend your ancestors, so you go back down into the lower chakras. But a devotee penetrates that, and then the next difficult and very subtle level of the curtain of nescience is there at the third eye, when a yogi is trying to make a run at that door of formlessness and always falling back. Beautiful stories of that in the Yoga Vishishta. Uddalaka is one particular one where he really musters all his strength finally and is able to penetrate that Rudra Granthi and get into formlessness. So all of that then sort of related here by this fixing of awareness on the mind rather than the soul, because the mind has many echelons, all the way up to that disorienting opening of the third eye. It can be very disorienting for a yogi to open that doorway, and has to be very stable in the heart first. And then there's no doubt that even ordinary people could all of a sudden jump to the third eye and have a very powerful experience and then fall back down, not be able to hold it. Ramakrishna said that's like the case of a lotus that opens only in the sunlight, but then a cloud comes on it and it closes right away. It can't bear the removal of light from it. So beings are like that. They can have a high state of mind, and then some problem comes and they immediately close up and can't hold that state of awareness anymore. So that march, gradual awakening, Sri Ramachandra says, that gradual awakening of Krama Mukti toward Jivan Mukti, towards Videha Mukti is made by steps. And you know how they think about Ram, right? Yeah, you probably know that they love him. Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Jaya Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram Bhaja Pyare Tu Sita Ram Ishvara Tero Naam Sabko Sanmati De Bhagavan Jaya Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram. A song like that, famous in its sentiments, in its melody, has crossed borders and come to us and was beloved by many great beings over millennia. So with that kind of deep devotion to this Ishvara form of God, beings can approach, you see, and they realize that the mind can be taken up to higher levels to where almost mind doesn't exist anymore. So that's where ordinary mind eventually turns to original mind, and original mind is pure mind, and pure mind is Buddha mind, and Buddha mind is God. Although it would be called differently in Buddhism. Now, do we have remaining time? I think we can take one more level here, the intellectual level, and then we'll take our break. It hampers the need for desire and study, that is, the effects of cause and effect in the mind, the brooding and everything that happens on this original cloud of unknowing. It hampers the mind's need and desire for study. And it's so prevalent today. It's actually what I'm trying to bring back to the householder level of things is, get yourself a good scripture and sit down and read it. Put aside your tea and coffee and food, get away from the dinner table, and sit like this and read it for an hour or two. Create a good study habit around study, and dip deep into the Jnana Yoga. That's the sword of wisdom in this tradition, in this day and age. That will cut away ignorance quickly. So really, if you've arrived at the intellectual level, remember, Father of Yoga has one impediment only at the intellectual level. All the other impediments are falling at these levels. That is, there's 4 at the physical level, and 2 at the spiritual level, and 3 at the mental level, but at the intellectual level is just one. Bhranti Darshana. That is a clouded way of seeing, an unclear intellect. So to clarify the intellect is going to be to engage in some serious spiritual study. Or Father of Yoga would, why did he make a Kriya Yoga system? When he has 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, why did he pick 3 of those as the best practice? What are they? Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana. Can you beat that? Devotion to God, study of scripture, and austerity. Can you beat that for a practice? If you just took the original Kriya Yoga, I'm not talking about the distortions of Kriya Yoga that are appearing nowadays. I'm talking about Patanjali's original Kriya Yoga. If you just took that tradition to heart and practiced that, then everything from the philosophical level on down would be clarified for you in this lifetime. So let's not delay. I can compare truth to the most corrosive substance in the universe. It'll burn through everything, Vivekananda says. Some things it'll take a little longer. But a little longer means one lifetime. There's the beautiful long slow boat to China, Bhakti way. But if you want the quick realization in this very lifetime, you intensify your sadhana, then Jnana Yoga is going to do it for you. That's why many people are coming to the higher mind schools and abandoning the sinking boat of the faith traditions that have become rather incapable of explaining curtain of nescience, cloud of unknowing, the disappearance of ignorance, the presence of evil, dualities, the mind, transcendence of heaven, destruction of karmas. Where do you find teachings like that? Only in the wisdom traditions, and particularly in those that concentrate on the Jnana Yoga. So this is going to be the swift sword stroke that's going to alleviate all your karmas and therefore your problems, even your diseases. You'll be able to forbear them if they persist, at the very least. So don't let that cause and effect in the mind hamper your need for study, then the desire for study. A lot of people, I hear that, they have a desire to study. Oh, I just don't have the time. What's time got to do with it? Is time real? I thought it was illusory. And if, as far as it is real, isn't there a god of time named Kala? Can't you appeal to him to give you more time to study? No matter where you look at it, there's a way to increase time. So how much percentage of your time are you putting upon spiritual study, and how much on the world, job, making money, and so forth? So you got to cut it out and shift that balance. Oh, I was able to put 2% of my mind on God, my life. 98 was on the world. So I better just, balance this out to start. Cut some nadis into my mind. You see, these nadis are like subtle nerve endings that are like trails that were once blazed, but they got grown over by weeds and stuff. You have to go through there with a machete again, cut some new nadis, and get some light up into that brain and into that mind. Be an intrepid spiritual traveler, and open up paths for light. Light, leaping through the nerves, Aurobindo said. Now, it fosters the ego's notion of doership and agency. Shakale tomari icha, ichamai taratumi, tomar karma, tumi karma. Oh Mother, you are the supremely willed one. All work belongs to you, others only call it their own. One of Ramakrishna's favorite songs rather. All work belongs to you, others only call it your own. But yet if you came at Ramakrishna and said, I don't do it myself, Mother does everything, he'd say, nonsense, you haven't realized that yet. That's a very high state of mind. I like the song, but I don't like pretension. Let's call a spade a spade. When we really give up all actions and all karmas to the Lord, it'll have its salient effects. And you'll see that in the realized soul, how they live, how they act, how they work. Krishna describes it to Arjuna in the Gita. They're not being pushed along by some other will than Mother's. In fact, their will has become Mother's will, one and the same thing. And then they act like, Sri Ramakrishna said, like a body made of toothpicks, sticks, see, not hung on strings. That's how he described himself. He'd put his body and say, this is only a pillowcase. So this is actual realization of this state of non-doership, non-agency. So in the meantime, it can be a very difficult problem at the intellectual level. Calling your work your own, that's actually the problem of the intellectual, isn't it? This is my knowledge. It's better than your knowledge. I'll argue with you about it. And I'll triumph, you see, and we'll debate about it, and I'll win. And so forth and so on. And then philosophy is, like religion, abandoned its original position. It isn't there anymore to clear up your mental doubts, Bhranti Darshana. It's there instead to make money and to get power and fame. Now, it also allows for the birth of misconceptions. And there is really kind of a more specific way of saying Bhranti Darshana, the birth of misconceptions in your mind. Now you can make an allowance to say, yes, you go from lower truth to higher truth, as we did yesterday, right, in that chart, Asatoma Satgamaya. But as you go from lower truth to higher truth, there is some sort of qualification and some sort of sign that you are actually making the grade, day to day, practice to practice, meditation to meditation. Whereas otherwise, if it's again back to a matter of misconceptions that you're not seeing and giving up when you should, see, you can hold a certain philosophical perspective for a while, then somehow it gets disproved to you, then you ought to shift away from it to a higher position, and that way remain flexible and pliable to the divine will. It's very much in accord with one's own will, giving up all up to Mother's will. She'll inform you, just like she informed Hiranyagarbha at the beginning, of what the truth is. The absolute truth. It's not a matter of your truth and my truth. You should give up that statement. It's a matter of the truth. That's non-dual truth. And all the seers are in agreement about that, so why should you be arguing with others about my truth and your truth? This is my way and that's your way. Really, a matter of non-duality means that you arrive at a position of Vedanta Siddhanta. You concur with the teachings of the great beings around non-duality, and only then will their fear of formlessness and fear of death and doubt and so forth go away. Abandon you. One day I awoke and my ignorance was gone, utterly gone. You should be able to say that in this lifetime. He goes on to say, who can conceal the truth? Who can hide a blazing fire in a cotton cloth? I can compare truth to the most corrosive substance, again, Vivekananda. So there's no way that you can conceal that truth when you know it to be the truth, Satyam. And at the intellectual and philosophical level then is where that begins to become an issue, because before that you are holding misconceptions. And those in Tantra are called malas, aren't they? Malas are not black marks on your soul, like sins and so forth that will never go away. Malas are fruit that is unripe yet. So as your fruit ripens, you come closer to Shiva. And guess who set it up that way? You did. I will uncover Shiva or Vishnu or Christ or Buddha in my own lifetime, and I'll see them face to face, but I'm going to have to do it by working out my karmas. A soul gets up out of the body and looks out at the past life, or looks out from a different bardo, however you want to say it, and says, oh, I see now where I went wrong. I see where I was inadequate. I see where I can do much better. I think I'll set it up next time so that these imperfections of mine will ripen over time and reveal to me at just the right moment the vision of Shiva. So malas are ripening of imperfections in you. And the fruit drops off, right, when it ripens. So both the impediment and the fruit fall away, and you arrive. Arrival is a precious thing. Follow through is a precious thing. You could be very late in your follow through. You want to be on time. And the last one here, contributes to the pride of knowledge. So that is, of course, a problem Sri Ramakrishna talked about a lot. Mere book learning contributes to the pride of knowledge, but study of scriptures and the meditation on what you study, that's a very powerful combination. The wisdom principles along with the connection with your own meditation. Gyan and Jan, they call it, the two wings of a bird. So here I'm going to stop, and after the break we'll take the philosophical and the spiritual level to task. In this one chart, which we're spending a whole class on because it's so important to know that there is cause and effect happening on other levels than just physical. And actually, the very word cause and effect is related so much to our chain of births and why we're here and why we are the way we are. And how, once identifying it, we can be who we want to be, who we should be. We can not engage anymore in Swarupa Nyata-bhava, running away from our true essence, but we will come to realization of Swarupa Pratishta. We will be our true essence in this very lifetime. So I thank you for listening for this first half. We will show these charts, this chart particularly, to the live streaming audience while we are away for 15 minutes on our break. Thank you very much. We are back, as they say. I always wanted to say that. And we're back into the realm of the Jnana Yoga, where we are spending 3 hours sitting in meditation. We're just saying at the break that the West isn't given to long periods of meditation, most of us. So Jnana Yoga is another way that helps your Jnana Yoga. Basically, you're going to sit there for as attentive as you can for 3 hours and in a yogic position, and actually prove to yourself that your knees don't ache and your back doesn't hurt. And you can sit easily, because when your mind is focused on the wisdom, you hardly notice your body. At least that's the way I feel when I am in this position of sharing what I know with all of you. So that's a good preoccupation to develop. One of the young boys who came here, and there are many of the teenagers and young people coming more often now to SRV lately, said the other day that came to his first class and he said, can I have other hobbies like that too? He told his dad. So his dad said, well, that wasn't really a hobby, but that's a good way to start into it when you're 14, as he was, hearing these teachings, because we know that the children of the rishis started at a very, very young age. And I often talk about my wife and I at home. We have our picture of 2 little Buddhist boys, Buddhist monks in robes, 5, 6 years old, already sitting in front of a very ancient old Rinpoche with scriptures in their hands. So at a very young age, they're sitting, they're breathing, they're learning the perennial wisdom. And do you think they're going to have any problems in life, like at the emotional level or mental level or psychological level, intellectual level? No, they're going to be cleared up very early on, and they're going to live a dharmic life and a life that's beneficial to others. So it's a very good illustration of what is possible in a society. And I've often said that more of the enlightened souls are being born in India and Tibet and Nepal and places like that, because they've had this ancient yogic schooling going on for so many millennia, previous to Christ even. So we know that these wisdom traditions come to us, they're to be taken advantage of. And we're beginning to see that in the West, and SRV is definitely given to that, a main preoccupation to study of scriptures and clearing our minds up at these levels. So all of this today is playing off of that 4th sloka in the 5th chapter of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Shvetashvatara was a great rishi who was sort of the grandsire of a family line whose children learned all of these things that he has gathered here and condensed for us. So that 4th sloka, just to remind our minds, differentiating each genus into its species and each species into its members, the Supreme Being withdraws them once more into their own ground. Then bringing forth the agents of creation, the Great Self holds sway over all of them. And precisely that next sloka is where we segued into this chart. Just as the sun shines, lighting up all of space, above, below, and across, even so does that one adorable being, the repository of all goodness and greatness, preside over everything that has the nature of a cause. So, nature of a cause is what we're looking into, and we arrived here then today at this philosophical level of things. There, the effects of ignorant action divide and weaken one's convictions. So, the convictions at a philosophical level ought to be very strong. And if they're undermined at all, you have to be adaptable, as I said in the first half, to not only change, if necessary, your own way of thinking philosophically, but begin to expand and adapt and take in other ways of thinking. And that's really the difference between maybe agnosticism, eclecticism, and universality. When you get to the universal level, then your mind is open to all of these different darshanas and their teachings and their conclusions, because beyond the moral and ethical level, or the level of intellectual debate and argument, one enters into the Dharma, and it's all about vows and precepts. And then from Dharma, one enters into sadhana, and that's all about practicing the vows and precepts and keeping current and honest with them. And then one enters into spiritual experience itself, so really there's no need or no use for argumentation at that point. It's just all about expansion and becoming wider, more breadth, more capacity in your ability to take on these great ideas and teachings. And they will naturally at that point fall into gradation, the things that are more essential and less essential. If you want to put it in a Vedantic way, nitya nitya vastu viveka, knowing the difference or discriminating the difference between what's essential and what's non-essential. So non-essential has some use, no doubt, probably even all the way down to mitya-gyan, completely false, as we looked at yesterday. Things that just don't make sense, like the son of a barren woman. Things that are just nonsensical and fragmented, they still have a certain validity for the observer to look upon, to see how mind can get so fragmented, and therefore can give them the ability to identify with, at need, with those levels of consciousness which are suffering or which have fallen into darkness. I woke up one day and my ignorance was gone. Gone, utterly gone means that it might be very difficult for you to identify anymore with ignorance. And so those people who are operating, those souls who are operating at a level of dense ignorance, it's going to be hard for you to relate to them. And sometimes, unless you have a great capacity, it's better that you don't strew pearls before swine and such things until you're really able to bear the brunt of that kind of karma and its reaction. That's cause and effect at a very, very dense level. However, one builds one's capacity over time and can and will eventually get a glimpse of the ocean of suffering, ocean of human suffering. Ram Prasad sings about that and how he was just entirely blown away, as the expression goes, by catching a glimpse of the ocean of suffering, universal suffering. And it's the kind of thing that can depress one for days. But that is a subtle level of Maya that great beings got caught in. Beings like Buddha and Sri Ramchandra got caught in that because they were such sensitive and compassionate souls. Then they looked upon the ocean of suffering at a level of wide capacity that they operated on, that they were born in, and had to receive the teaching of that tendril of Maya that still occupies the mind, that is focused on the reality of that thing rather than its illusory nature. So it's very, very subtle, causal at that level. So when you get up to these levels of psychological and spiritual, that's pretty much what you're broaching. And so when we say here, resist, divides and weakens one's convictions, what should your convictions be, for instance? Like, Satsangatve nisangatvam, nisangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatvam nishchalitatvam, nishchalitatvam jivanamukti, bhaja govinda. So if you are to love the Lord, love the Lord, love the Lord with your whole mind, your whole soul, your whole heart, and so forth, then you probably should look into satsangatve, holy company, because that's where doubt and weakness of convictions cannot exist anymore. You see people with the courage of their convictions there. If there's any problem at all, it's trying to communicate with them on the level that they occupy and learning to share in an open-minded spirit. So the courage of your convictions is a very good thing. But if from satsangatve, what happens then? Nisangatvam. Nisangatvam nirmohatve. You get rid of ignorance in the mind. Moha. Nir. Wiped out. The ignorance in your mind is wiped out. And when that happens, you get nishchalitatvam. What's nishchala mean? It means resolve. Or the courage of your convictions. And from that you get jivan mukti, freedom in this lifetime. A living liberated soul. And then, Bhaja Govindam, I can love the Lord. I can love the Lord with my whole heart. Before then, my convictions are weak, then it's going to be a running hot and cold type of thing, off and on. So learn at the philosophical level to that this cause and effect playing havoc at that level tends to weaken and divide you. And you need to find that cement, that grounding, that power of attraction in you towards love, devotion, wisdom, knowledge, and selfless service. And that will increase the courage of your conviction. Also, it enforces a false belief in relativity. Philosophical level. And that's that curtain of nescience again, the doubt whether I'm form or formlessness. That plagues the soul into later stages of spiritual evolution. And one that is often, it persists. Is the world real or is the world unreal? But Sri Ramakrishna says, when one catches the taste of the bliss of God, one doesn't care anymore whether the world is real and unreal. It becomes a moot point. Only God is real. So I often give that kind of humorous conclusion that I've drawn from the great Vedantic statement you hear when you first enter holy company, Satsangatve in Vedanta. They say, Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. The Brahman is real, the world is unreal. And everyone goes, oh, woe is me, the world is unreal. I don't want to hear this. But you missed the first part of that statement. Brahman is real. So that's going to be the clarifying factor in everything. To know for sure and for certain with the apt and final conclusion of the seers, of the wisdom traditions, that Brahman is real, that reality is real. It wouldn't be called reality if it wasn't real, would it? And somebody wouldn't have coined a word for it. Same is true of the void. If you're a nihilist, then who was it that coined the word for nihilism? The one looking on the void. So you should probably avoid the void, or annihilate nihilism, and get with the philosophical picture here, that sarvosmi, everything is, and now it's a matter of looking into it and placing it in a perspective that I can operate under. And it doesn't matter so much whether the world is real or not. So these, otherwise, cause and effect in the mind at that level is enforcing a sense that that relativity is real. And how can that be? It's a contradiction in terms. Relativity, real. Real relativity. It doesn't make sense. So Ramakrishna used to say to his devotees, if they know who they are, who I am, and what the world is, I won't have to worry about them anymore. I can go fry other fish. There's plenty of people who haven't made that distinction yet who could use my help. So as far as my direct disciples are concerned, if they know who I am, Ishvara form, God in form, if they know who they are, the Atman, the eternal soul, birthless and deathless, and what the world is, changing, then I won't have to worry about them. A very beautiful conclusion he drew in his level of putting on the robe of a teacher. He said, basically, then I'll cast it off and be free and dance in the fields of the Lord again in ecstasy. So, false belief, false sense of security, false this, false that, that's all part of the curtain of nescience, isn't it? We want to do away with it. Thin it out as much as possible. And wake up to the reality that is our true nature. Philosophical level, effects of ignorant action also seeds doubt and inadvertence in the mind. Doubt, of course, a part of the curtain of nescience, no doubt. But inadvertence is also a big problem. It's one of the mental problems that Patanjali cites in the 9 vikshepas, or antaryayas he calls them, the inner problems in the mind, is this inadvertence, being unable to act with any definite conclusion. Later on, it manifests itself as taking one step forward and taking 2 steps back, or backsliding, as they call it. You can't feel like you're making any real spiritual progress. It's called alabdha bhumikatva. That's a 7-syllable Sanskrit word. Alabdha bhumikatva. and anavasti tatvani. That's also 7 syllable Sanskrit word. So those are nice big long words that we don't have anything really equivalent for in the English. We have to look into the original Sanskrit to get some idea of what spiritual problems are. Are there problems at the spiritual level? Yes, there are. Is there doubt and fear and ignorance at the level of savikalpa samadhi? Yes, there are. Because wisdom and ignorance are still making their appearance. That is, I'm sliding into deeper periods of wisdom and I'm sliding back of non-recognition of it or non-access to it. So I'm going in and out of these stages. It's not until seedless samadhi happens, nirvana or sampragata, that all samskaras are wiped out. Even the samskaras of wisdom, even the samskaras of bliss, and of course the samskaras of my previous lifetimes. And, might as well say it, even the samskaras of samadhi that one developed at a penultimate level in spiritual life also get wiped away. So you say doubt persists to the very end, right up to the very end, some form of it. So in the meantime, we accentuate these powerful teachings, you see, that help keep that curtain of nescience thin so we can always see through it as the witness consciousness. Now if you go on to the third one, it seeds doubt. Oh, that is the third one. Let's go to the fourth one. Stymies crucial ideological conclusions. Though that's the Vedanta Siddhanta, or that idea of not being able to come to a conclusion about things on a philosophical level. So you're sort of swept along in the concurrence of opinion. Ram Prasad sings about that in some nice songs I could sing you. But basically, that flux of opinions becomes less and less important to him as he reaches the higher levels of understanding, and he's not given to participate in it anymore. Conflict of opinions and so forth. People who think too much or too highly or too deeply about the opinions of others tend to weaken their own, and they should have some conclusions of their own to rest in. In fact, it's a good teaching spiritually to say that if you can't make a conclusion, then make a false conclusion. Because not making a conclusion keeps you stymied. But if you make a conclusion that's half true and half false, the minute you make that conclusion, everything is moving towards you to disprove it, or to prove it, or to disprove what's false in it and to prove what's true in it. And then you can make progress. So you kind of get rid of your pride of arrogance, don't you? Your pride of intellectual knowledge that you encountered at these lower levels by stepping out and risking a little bit. They say the 6 stanzas on nirvana and on renunciation and so forth. There's those beautiful sentiments that say, you know, that only renunciation is fearless. Fear attends on everything else. Those who are rich fear those who are richer, and those who are beautiful fear disfigurement, and the rich fear thieves. But the wise fear somebody more wise. So they haven't really renounced that wisdom as belonging to Divine Mother. That was really one of the most marvelous things about Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, is that he had completely given everything 100%, or as he said, 110% to Divine Mother reality. All wisdom belongs to her, which is why he loved that song, Shakale Tomari Ichya. It's Mother is the supremely willed one. I'm only the house, she's the indweller. I'm the chariot, she's the charioteer. And I move as she moves me, and I think as she thinks through me. So that kind of level of understanding or comprehension gets rid of that pride and arrogance in one's intelligence, one's wisdom, in one's level of realization, and then pauses one at a deeper cause that is causing that kind of thinking. That is basically then one will become more flexible and more willing to risk in order to grow. You know, people who don't risk anything, they tend to stay stagnant in one place. So you step out a bit and risk it. And if it's proven to you that you're wrong, then at that point then you make a change. So it's good to make conclusions, that's what I'm saying. Make a final conclusion around something rather than to stay inadvertent, as we just said. One of the big problems in the spiritual level of things, which is actually one of the more interesting studies for beings of our ilk, those of us who have been studying in traditions for a long time in our lifetimes, for 40, 50 years or so, like our founder, Lex Hickson's, with so much time in the wisdom traditions. His whole life was given to them. And not mixture either. He practiced one for a long time until he got a certain essence out of it. So these kinds of problems that attack us at the spiritual level are very subtle, you might say even causal. And the first one here is that this cause and effect at that level resists one's turn towards peace. And there's this peace that passes all understanding. And so if you're trying to get understanding to get rid of misunderstanding, then you're still at that level of sort of philosophical juxtaposition. But when you want peace first and foremost, as Holy Mother has said, you need peace first and foremost. That's the only way you can get into concentration, into meditation, and into samadhi is going to be having that peace as a penultimate possession inside of you. And contentment and equanimity are sort of correlated to that. Only peace is more abiding. They have a special word for it called shanti. And it's going to abide on the outer, on the inner, and on the transcendent level, which is why we chant it 3 times. Shanti, shanti, shanti. So when that kind of peace comes upon the aspirant, then one solves a lot of the problem that occurs at the spiritual level. For instance, religious narrowness. That's the next one. If this cause and effect can exist in the mind for a long time with a sort of religious narrowness, like my watch keeps the only right time. So one becomes truly Catholic in the true description of, or definition of that word. Catholic means truly universal-minded and open-minded. So it's not that one has lost one's discrimination between Mitya-gyan and Agyan and Gyagyan and Gyan and Gyan and Vigyan and Vigyan and Brahmagyan. Those are 5 very different levels of wisdom that we note in our tradition. But one is noting the difference between them so that one can remain posited in the one chooses. For those who live in an absolute non-dual state, Brahmagyan is going to be their default zone. They're not going any lower than that. And there's some very marvelous souls that exist at that level. There's some very marvelous souls that abandon that level in order to teach Vigyan. And so they would abandon it on purpose. Like Vivekananda used to say, basically, give up your desire for moksha and take up the service of the suffering world. You can get moksha later, or moksha is always yours, however he would put it. Bhakti and mukti, fine, but what we want now is service of the suffering world, service of God and mankind. He was holding that up as the highest. So naturally you wouldn't be living in Brahmagyan if you were teaching the highest truth. It's a sort of a strange thing to say that, but nevertheless, beings like, say, Holy Mother has said, they ask her, do you always remember Brahman? And she said, no, how can I remember Brahman when I'm engaged in this work? So remembering Brahman, we think of it as maybe, I remember Brahman now as I'm doing my trade, as I'm playing my music, as I'm doing whatever. That's just a memory of Brahman. When we're talking about remembering Brahman, we mean being there, right? I am there in it, so I'm formless. And there is no work. There is no world. There is no personality. It's like deep sleep magnified many times as per consciousness. So that's just like saying I can do my mantra out in the bus, but I won't do it when I sit in meditation. I do my mantra a lot, Babaji, my students say. Well, where do you do it? I say, do it in meditation too, because mantra is the supreme practice in so many different religions, and it will help the mind to eradicate its waves. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, chit shakti. And then when the mind gets concentrated, then the beads can be put down and you're there in a non-dual state. I think it was Hashra or Hridai or one of the attendants of Sri Ramakrishna would sit at the door and people would come, and they'd see Sri Ramakrishna, but actually they want them to see him. Come over here. You can talk to him anytime. Come talk to me. So Ramakrishna came out of the door one time and saw Hashra, I think it was, doing the beads. And Sri Ramakrishna sat down and said, give me those. He started doing it. Within like 2 or 3 recitations of the mantra of Kali, the beads fell out of his hand. It was gone. So that kind of immediate concentration or sensitivity, just that you would say the name or think of the Lord once, and it puts you in that state immediately, that's some real power of spiritual suggestion for you. And of course, that's the way he lived, on the edge of that all the time. And so those marvelous beings that do that, he himself used to say, I'm not given to the work Naren's going to do. Naren can go around the world. He can go anywhere, eat with anyone, eat anything, do anything, and it's not going to hurt him. But he says, my nature is too sattvic for that. It's not, his body was delicate. So that kind of level of Brahmagyan down to teaching humanity and so forth at the Vijnana and Jnana levels is noted here at the level of spiritual cause and effect. Religious narrowness is not going to persist in a mind like that. They're going to want to help everyone. Beautiful teaching in the Dasa Bhumikas of Buddhism, right? 10 lands, 10 kinds of lands. Pure lands, flaming lands, so forth. Is that on one of the higher levels of those 10 lands, 8th, 9th level, you have to give up being a Buddhist. You have to give up calling yourself a Buddhist, because you cannot help everyone. So you want to be that sort of non-denominational, that sort of universal. Like Ramakrishna used to say, words like Christian and Hindu and Muslim, they're actually barriers to the realization of God. So, whereas that statement can be unwrapped on other levels, the level he's meaning it at that particular moment in that perspective is that you're causing a division between yourself and others. So when those divisions go away and you're truly universal minded, then you can appeal to all peoples. And in the presence of Ramakrishna, there were Christians that came and said, you're the person I've been seeing in my vision for so long. You're my Christ. I've been worshiping you in my mind, in my visions. We used to see nuns come to Swami Sheshananda here in Portland and say, we've realized Ramakrishna is like kind of the Christ of the day. What do we do? And Swami Sheshananda would go, shh, go back to your convent. No, don't say anything. Worship Ramakrishna secretly in your heart if you wish, but there's no difference between Ramakrishna and Christ. And that's why the Vedanta centers hold Christ, Buddha, Ramakrishna as the 3 main images in their shrines. Kali isn't even really featured behind the scenes because that's a little bit too terrific for Western consciousness, at least for a while. Although Buddhism is changing the face of that too with its wrathful deities and its various Buddha fields and so forth, beginning to come forward to show us that the devil isn't an incarnate evil, but it's basically if you have darkness, you need to have some darkness come and get rid of that darkness. See, fight fire with fire. So if you have a wrathful deity, invite a more wrathful deity into you and dispatch it. So it's about facing off with your demons, as they say, which all exist in your mind. If Christ's, the darkness of the soul, you see, in his 40 days in the wilderness, or Lord Buddha's meeting Mara in his 49 days meditation under the bo tree, proved anything to us, it was that all negativities exist in the mind. And as we look at cause and effect in the mind, you can see at how many levels those things do exist. And if we want to get to them, eradicate them, and live a purely divine life, we're going to have to face off with those. They could take personifications, you see. There could be the personification of narrow religious thinking come to you in the form of a person, you see. There it is, manifest right before me in the form. But really, the cause of it has been back in the mind of that individual, of you, and all the way back into the level of the suras and asuras. So something about this religious narrowness and how to defeat it in its tracks. Now next, and penultimate, it underlies the truth of formlessness. It undermines, very important distinction there, undermines the truth of formlessness. there you get to that level of curtain of nescience, which is around fear and doubt. That you fear being formless, or that you have a doubt that your true nature is formless, is the result of cause and effect chain for many lifetimes. It should be something that you take to naturally. And, when your meditations, when you're very sattvic, you do, if you get a chance to see that formless nature, you do go towards it without fear. But at all other times, when it penetrates through the curtain of nescience due to some other factor, like saying to the mic, testing, testing, see if it's working. Well, Kundalini Shakti does that to the body-mind mechanism of the human being to see if it's ready, so she can pierce through your tamas and rajas level of curtain of nescience, just to see if you're ready to move toward the light at a level like that. That is, sattva is fine. Anyone can see God and feel great when they're in sattva, but who can do it when tamas and rajas is upon them? So to have an experience of formlessness in meditation when the mind is in that sort of a duller or restless state is grounds for retreating from having that experience of formlessness. You're not going to want to go to it as you would in sattva. So keep that in mind as you meditate over days and months, that you needn't have no fear. And people often say that. What if I die in samadhi? And Sri Ramakrishna used to say to Naren, he was a young boy, the young Vivekananda, imagine you were a fly and there was a bowl of nectar here, and what would you do? And he'd say, well, I'd sit on the edge and crane my neck over and sip it with my tongue and be careful not to fall in because I'd die. And Ramakrishna would burst out laughing and say, oh, no, that's the ocean of nectar. That's your true nature. You can't die there. You'll truly live there. The fly body and its desire for nectar, that's a different level. So this natural penchant, like I call it smriti bedu, in the atomic particle, in the atmic particle chart we've been looking at over these series of live streaming classes in Hawaii before we arrived here, has that element of smriti bedu in it, some causal memory in you that is a natural tendency towards an attraction for your formless nature. It should be brought forward as much as possible in this lifetime so that you have a chance for nirvikalpa samadhi. That is, you open up the gates for that to happen to you. It's only you that's closing the gates, these nadis. So if you want to open those channels, then you do it by some self-effort. That's why some of these songs are so precious. They say it to you in different ways. So basically, Manre Krishikajjanana, Manre Krishikajjanana. It goes on like that, but the main idea of it is, oh mind, you do not know how to farm the field. Your mind field remains fallow, and you don't know how to do spiritual practice, basically. So if one knew how to mine the field of consciousness, one would be planting seeds for future births, for a higher awareness in future births, because he's got all the seeds right there. He's moving along the field himself. Well, why shouldn't he do that as he moves through the field? Instead, he's brooding, or he's fearful, or he's in doubt. See, and that's not a way to live. So, O mind, you do not know how to mine the field, fertilize the field, and harvest, and go through to harvest. That's one of the beautiful songs about sadhana in our tradition. So don't let anything undermine the truth of formlessness for you. That's a very precious thing. It's very rare, so since it is rare, it's precious. And since it is rare also, it's something that you should increase awareness of inside of yourself and in your practice. Hold that out as a very high and deep verity. Finally, we have this problem of the subtle deposits in the mind, samskaras they're called. Samskaras connected to karma, connected to rounds of birth and death and ignorance, in which one seeds more negativities, cuts more ruts. I mean, there's one thing to create new nadis, right? What about driving new ruts into the mind field? Or maybe, plowing the field and then never putting any seed in, you see. It's just left without anything, any conclusion, like we said. I mean, the Buddhists call it the 9 links, the nidanas. And it goes through this whole series of, at 3 levels, basically conditionings that go on. Trishna and Vijnana. They have a different meaning for Vijnana in that tradition. So basically, as these links connect to each other, then over a series of 3 lifetimes, the soul gets bound. And it's probably going to take an ordinary soul, so-called ordinary, some 3 lifetimes to 5 lifetimes to break free of that. A lifetime to create it, a lifetime to recognize it, a lifetime to do sadhana and get free. Interpreted by different schools in different ways, but the 9 links are a way of explaining this subtle samskaras, deposits that are in the mind, and they're at a spiritual level because souls have gotten some realization. That's why Krishna talks about it in terms of refinement of consciousness over lifetimes, and Ram too talks about it as getting, the mind gets enlightenment by stages. So they know about this krama mukti, this kind of gradual enlightenment way that many souls are creeping along. And they're there to help. It's one of the functions of Shiva too, the 4 padas, is to keep the philosophical systems in the world so that the spiritual axioms can get dispensed. You see, and then people can take advantage of them in their lifetime. So this step-by-step process, this gradual growth, is very well known to most beings. And it will do away with these subtle samskaras over time. There's an admixture in many people's minds. They'll be born in the houses of the pious, born in the houses of the rich. There are many people who are born to rich folks, like our founder, Lex Hixon, who gave their whole life to spiritual practice. Money was just a background thing. And then being born in the houses of rishis or yogis, that's very rare birth to attain, Krishna says. So by that means anyway, or by those means, beings are moving along this trajectory towards higher enlightenment, towards full enlightenment, basically, where they won't need to transmigrate anymore in ignorance. So at that level you can see where some samskaras, some subtle samskaras, deposits, will be there in the mind. And so, you can run ruts like that. I am a good moral person, I'm going to heaven, is a kind of a rut. Or, I am seeking enlightenment. That is kind of a rut, isn't it? It's a very subtle rut, samskara in the mind. So you want to create a nadi next to it that you could travel along that says, I am already enlightened. I and my Father are one. The seeking is only an apparent movement I'm moving through. A game I'm playing with my mother, a game of hide and seek. However you want to describe it, there are ways of holding a mask and then tearing it off at the right moment. So at this level of subtle samskaras in the mind, the effects of ignorant action are taking place. Ignorant action at that level is pretty much ignorant thought, because thought is a kind of act. And don't we say that thought is father to the deed? Even in Western way of thinking, thought is father to the deed. So then you know that all of this has taken place. All your deeds and actions have taken place in a series of chains of cause and effect. And you have to be very wary that those might have left some ruts in your mind, or some grooves, some impressions. There are different words you try and borrow from English to describe samskara. None of them are perfectly adequate. But impressions in the mind stuff, in that mind field, which is why I sang this, Man re krishi kaj janana, may I learn how to farm the field of my mind as best as possible. Well, let's take the final quote here. The phenomenon of causality does not apply only to science and physics, but also and predominantly to the many territories of the mind. When cause and effect is inspected as pertaining to subtle interior planes, and physical actions and their repercussions are traced to psychological, intellectual, mental, and emotional levels, the valuable and indispensable science of yoga gets revealed, and its teaching of karma. With that in hand, the aspiring soul soon solves all problems in relativity and gets free of causation for all time. So, cause and effect, one of the great dualities, as a sort of barrier, has to be looked at emotional, mental, psychological, intellectual, philosophical, and spiritual levels in order for us to deal with it. And then we will be following through on, say, Dalai Lama's assertion to us that we look into karma and reincarnation seriously to begin to dissolve the problems that we're holding right now at these levels of mind. Emotion particularly. If we can get over that, then we can get on to some real business. We can be about our Father's business. A couple of my students came up at the break and said, isn't this pretty much like the 5, 6, or 7 koshas, depending on what system you look at? Pretty much the pranamaya kosha, the emotional level of things. Right? Pranamaya kosha at the third chakra, and then the manomaya kosha, and then the vijnanamaya kosha. The thing is here is that at the psychological level, it can move down toward the mental, or it can move up toward the intellectual. And at the intellectual level, it can move up to the philosophical, or it can move down to the psychological. So it's a good way of connecting, leaving aside the Adara system for a while, looking at it more in terms of our Western understanding. You can see how both these levels of mind and intellect, which are manomaya kosha and vijnanamaya kosha, have their upward trends and their downward turns. And as the more we turn on those wheels, the more these samskaras get placed in our mind, this residue, and we're not going to be able to see that and deal with it until we get very adept at meditation. Yoga and Patanjali is very, very good at that. I think there is no system in the world that I've ever studied as complex as yoga, as the eight-limbed yoga. Maybe barring Tantra, but Tantra's not a systematized. It hasn't been systematized. It's too widespread for anyone to do anything with. It's so ancient and so old and so vast. But in yoga, the systematizer of yoga is very much influenced probably by Lord Buddha, who was some 650 years before him. And he came out with this idea of these subtle samskaras existing in a very, very high level of samadhi. For instance, sasmita or sananda samadhis are samadhis of bliss and ego, right? Refined ego and refined bliss. Somehow, that's a very high samadhi, but it's going to have some samskaras coexisting with it that has some attachment to subtle bliss. That's why he lists the 4 obstacles to meditation. The 4th one is attachment to subtle bliss. So it must be at a very high level of samadhi that one has to somehow abandon that, give it up. Or when I was saying once in Lokanath liked this teaching that Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are standing with their back to the Brahman, the light of Brahman. So that light is coming through the Trinity and turning into all the worlds of name and form in various gradations. But at the end of a very, very long cycle, one of those beings will turn and see the light and will give up the Brahma form. He won't be the Hiranyagarbha in the next long cycle of things. He'll abandon that for another great soul. That great soul will take up that great responsibility. We're in one day and one night of Brahma, is equal to many, many yugas and mahayugas. So in that same way, this soul that's facing off against attachment to subtle bliss thinks, this bliss is mine. I've arrived at Ananda. Maybe not. Maybe Ananda is something reserved only for the ocean of Brahman. And there's still a tendril of samskara, or residue of samskara in me that has to all of a sudden make some unique movement inside of itself and turn and see the sun and give up the moon, because the moon shines by borrowed light. So that's the kind of explication of this level of spiritual. Very hard to talk about, but it is something to be aware of as you undertake your sadhana, especially your Dhyan Yoga, your meditation. Could be that those are some of the causes which are keeping you from meditating very deeply, or you're always falling off from deep meditation. You could find them here in these upper levels. That's what I'm trying to, why I'm introducing it, so you can specify it and see it and do away with it. To know a thing is to master a thing. If you meditate first on earth, and then on water, and then on fire, you'll get rid of your fear of earth, fire, and water. Whether you drowned in a previous lifetime, or burned in a house fire, or died in a landslide, you'll get free of your fear of land, water, and fire if you meditate and get knowledge on them. What does knowledge mean at that level? Knowledge of everything about the cosmos, the earths, the many planets in the sky, the nature of earth, the different minerals, the different ores, gold, silver, iron, everything about earth you meditate on, and conveniently package it inside of that tattva called earth. See? Prithivi, apaho, water, go on to water, and then Oshadaya, Vanashvataya, and go on to all the 5 elements, and as the peace chant says, master them inside of yourself because they came out of you. That's the connection to make. You're not mastering them outside of you. Have you tried to master nature outside of you? Those who are trying are having a hard time of it. It's much greater than you are. But you master it inside of you. You just come out of the cosmic collective and individual mind as a manifestation of the mind. Objects are just thought made concretized. They're your thought. And they've become solidified using the properties of Maya and nature. So you can dissolve them. That's all about dissolving the mind stream. You take everything that's in earth and water and fire and air and ether, and you dissolve it. And when you get to ether, you'll find out that there are other ethers inside of you, not just a physical ether, but there's an emotional ether, a mental ether, and so forth and so on. And you can work at that level when you find it, not until. And once you find it and work at it, you can master it. And when you master it, you'll destroy your fear, your doubt, your ignorance, and you'll give up brooding on it. How many people brood about the disappearance of this earth? There are not billions and billions of other earths in the night sky that God could create a form on if he wanted to. So you can brood about all these things forever. It's not doing you or anyone else any good. In fact, it's probably creating a subtle samskara in the mind that's going to be very difficult to get rid of later. So fill in those grooves and create new channels. That's pretty much the trend of our teaching in this, my Dharma visit here in October at the time of Navaratri, or Divine Mother worship. Now, since we have come to some time, and thank you for your long-standing attention to this chart, which I've wanted to go into in depths and take apart for a long time. We've seen it a few times, but we've never really taken it apart at all levels and talked about it. Now, back to your first 4 slokas here, and particularly that first one in chapter 5. We are going to be doing some homework, right, that I asked you to do yesterday on these 2 charts. And I also said that next week in San Francisco, I'll be live streaming from San Francisco Center, SRV Center, and it'll be at the same time as this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, so you can tune us in on your computer or mechanism, and you can look back to chapter 2, because the San Francisco students are just finishing up chapter 2. In this visit here, we've finished chapter 4 and we're starting into chapter 5. So when you look back, you'll probably find me teaching on the mighty river of the manifested Brahman, and you can recall that to mind. Remember, every time you take in a teaching, it's the nature of Scripture, and it's also the nature of wisdom, and therefore of truth, that you learn something new, and you go back and study something old, and you see it in a whole new light. Isn't it true? You can read a book 10 years ago and then pick it up and read it now, and you'll see it in a whole new light because your awareness has shifted levels in that 10 years. That's particularly true of the spiritual aspirant. So we have grown leaps and bounds, hopefully in our studies and in our devotions and in our meditation. So if we come back and look at old teachings, so-called old teachings, in this new light, we'll see many new things that are creating connections for us, connecting the dots inside of us, until enough of those connections and those insights, all of a sudden, it'll give rise to a major realization. With a nail knife of your concentrated awareness, you will cause a big hole in the curtain of nations and see through. One great vision like that is enough to convince you of the nature of reality as being birthless, deathless, formless. So as we look at these, I can just give you a general outlay in the remaining 15 minutes so that will help your homework. As far as the mighty river of Brahman goes, you can see there that it has several levels. Pretty much you're talking again about the tattvas, aren't you? As you see, there's the mind, there's the 5 senses, there's the 5 subtle senses, the 5 pranas, and the 5-fold miseries. Seems like there's a lot of 5s in our tradition, including 5 sheaths, the panchakoshas. And then there's the panchatanmatras that are also subtle elements, and there's the 5 elements, and there's the 5 senses. So this is called quintuplication. And I have to borrow that word from English, but pancha is a way of teaching cosmic principles in India. It always has been. You might say that everything starts with one, and then that oneness is infused with triputis, and that triputi gives rise to dualities, and then the dualities give rise to 5s. In whatever order it happens from causal to subtle to gross, it's going to end up in this kind of gradation. And consciousness is visiting, you must say at least that, consciousness is visiting these different levels of cosmology that it's projected itself, cosmically, collectively, and individually. So this is why these beautiful quotes from the Shvetashvatara come forward, like, "That one who projected consciousness, who is the bridge of immortality, ever tranquil, over the wavy and unnavigable ocean of samsara, who delivered the Vedas as a life raft, who is the purifying fire of the mantra stationed firmly in Mayic waters, I go for refuge in that effulgent one, whose clear light turns one's understanding towards the Atman." Very nice, huh? Pretty much a declaration of that one indivisible soul and how it manifests. Because inside of one paragraph there you have the Supreme Brahman, you have the enlightened soul, and then you have the seeker, don't you? And even it seems the enlightened soul is going towards the other enlightened soul to get information, isn't it? Ramakrishna went towards Brahmana, Bhairavi Brahmana and Tatapari and so forth, whether he needed them or not. So there's greater clarification that can be gotten even for the avatar who comes into this particular level of consciousness. Perhaps he hasn't been around for 500 or 600 or 700 years like you have, taking 5 or 6 bodies. And so he comes here and he wants to see what's going on lately that I've missed, as it were. And so he's looking at the present day humanity, cultures, and he's trying to get some grasp or handle on that so that he can do the most amount of good in that amount of time he has in the body. Shankara, 32 years. Vivekananda, 39 years. Sri Ramakrishna, 50 or so years. So they want to make the most use of their time for you, to benefit you and the collective humanity. So all of these stations, you have to sort of inform yourself about it so you know that consciousness is visiting them. And that's sort of what he's saying here. He delivered the Vedas as a life raft for everyone. So come back with these non-dual truths and make sure they're spread broadcast among you. You have to hear them. Whether you like them or not, whether you're attracted to them or not, whether you study them or not, is sort of secondary to him. He wants to broadcast them to everyone because it'll find the right places to go. He's creating nadis and channels himself by speaking. So the places where the water of that flow of his wisdom want to find its way, like a river, into you, if you're closed, it'll flow off somewhere else. If you're open, it'll go to you, and then from you to someone else. So this is the way energy works. And this energy is, of course, of a very subtle nature. So with that in mind, study this chart for your homework. When I come back in mid-February, we'll look at it only probably briefly before we go on. And as far as this chart too, for instance, so I just barely mentioned that. There's this river of Brahman is, what we meditate on is the manifested Brahman. Its source is the boundless ocean called the mind. And it's fed by 5 streams called the 5 senses. It contains 5 dangerous whirlpools called the subtle senses. It has 5 elements which are currents in it, called the 5 earth, air, fire, water, ether. It has 5 pranas, which are like agitations in it. And it's attended by 5 swirling rapids called the 5-fold miseries. So, interesting, all of that, replete with suffering, is a part of the manifested Brahman. Probably came up with a better word for it later called Maya, and separated it out from Brahman completely. But as a manifested Brahman or Saguna Brahman, it's the river you have to navigate. Isn't it nicely put? Because are we not in Brahman right now? Are we not in God? Or are we to say that, this is not God here, so what I'm doing is all futile? So the way they put it isn't so much in the way of the illusory schools, the Mayavadan schools, but more in the way of this body of your boat that has to be navigated through rough waters in order to get to the unmanifested Brahman, to the real source. That's why Kamalakanta has the beautiful song, move slowly and cautiously in life. The body of your boat is going to go up with the ebb and down, up with the flow and down with the ebb of the tide. See? And always keep it peaceful. Or as Sri Ramakrishna said, make sure you keep the boat in the water, but don't let water in the boat. And in that way, you can navigate this river of manifest Brahman. I'll just say that much in the time remaining, and you can look at it more as back as his slokas. And then over here, I created that chart called the Brahma Chakra, based upon that very, very thick philosophical statement, sloka, that said, we think of Brahman as a universe resembling a wheel which has 1 felly with triple tires, 16 extremities, 50 spokes, 20 counter spokes, 6 sets of 8, which is driven along 3 different roads by a means of a single belt that each turn gives rise to series of 2. If you were just a novice student, you looked at that, you go, I think I'll just put that down, and who's going to explain that to me, you see? So basically, I felt that way when I wanted to create this chart. So how am I going to put that into a chart that is recognizable and easy for us to look at? So when I saw this vision of the cosmic form here, I saw this could very easily be that felly. You see, inside of it is nature and Maya, going around in circles. And there's a belt that it's running along. It's the belt from virtue to vice and from happiness to misery. And each turn gives rise to more twos, more twos, more twos. Bandva Mohena, as we were just singing in the beautiful song by Tulsi Das. Please help my mind stop seeing these twos and considering them to be real. I might not be able to stop them, but I can stop considering them being real, can't I? There's the point. Maya may flow on, or even when you're enlightened, ignorance may remain in others, but it doesn't mean it's going to affect you. You can withdraw from it now because you've gotten higher wisdom. So there's the belt, and And then the revolution gives rise to 2, and then you have the 16 extremities. Well, the triple tire that it rolls along is Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, so you pretty much already got the teachings on that yesterday. We called it the 3 Maya Shaktis, right? Remember the names? Avarana, Vikshepa, and Prakasha, the revelatory power. So this triple tire of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, or obscuration, distortion, and revelation, is going on all the time, in case you haven't noticed. Even going on in your work. You have a problem at work and you just can't solve it, you see. So it's being obscured. Or you think of a solution that doesn't work, that's distortion. Then all of a sudden you, I know how to solve that. You weren't even at work when that happened. You say, you go there and you implement it and the whole thing works again. That happens outside and it also happens inside, but the cause of it is inside. I used to do these charts, the first 50 of them or so, with a definite exterior design. Everything from then on was all interior. Every chart I thought, I can lay that there, that can go there. Oh, that connects nice with that, you see. So now the chart all is in my head before I go and put it on the computer. So eventually everything moves from the invention to the inventor, and then from the inventor to the wisdom in the inventor, and from the wisdom to the wisdom mother herself. And the more you can make that connection, the more you can clarify everything on the nature of work, on the nature of action, on the nature of all these different levels where cause and effect is accompanying you or plaguing you. Or you're just noticing it and using it to your advantage. That's Prakasha Shakti, right? If you have these dualities plaguing you everywhere, then why not apply Prakasha Shakti at the level? Reveal it to yourself. In that regard, your Guru is the Prakasha Shakti, right? Showing you some definite revelations on these levels so you can make the connections so that in your practice it's going to be easy for you to dispense with these things that are bothering you and plaguing you. So, that said, you go into all these levels, 16 extremities, there's all the 5s that we talked about over here. See? And then the 50 spokes, that was a good one. 5 viparyayas, I had to look them up. 28 ashaktis, 9 tushtis, 8 siddhis. So there's complacencies and there's powers and there's a whole thing is involved in that. Basically it says it there, fallacies, disabilities, contentments, and occult powers. The many imperfections are built into the design. See? Mind, basically we're talking about manifest Brahman, we're talking about the great mind, right? In the great mind, the imperfections that are going to manifest later are built into the design. Which is precisely why Buddha and others wanted to get beyond the great mind. They saw a light that was perfect. Then you go on down to the 20 counter spokes, pegs or wedges, or they call them linchpins sometimes, in the whole mechanism. It's a very beautiful system. And when you get there, you're seeing these 3 different roads. Adharma, Jnana, and Dharma. That is the people who are not seeing the whole thing and they're just in ignorance of it. There are people who are trying to get wisdom and make sense out of it. And there are people who have arrived at Dharma and they're just living in that as a protective barrier against ignorance and forgetfulness. And then 6 sets of 8 were really good too. 8-fold nature, 8 body ingredients, 8 psychic powers, 8 mental states, 8 superhuman beings, and 8 virtues of the soul listed down here. So I'll leave that for you to look into. This is how they call the Brahma Chakra, the wheel of the manifested Brahman, or the river of the manifested Brahman, in those slokas in chapter 2, which are slokas 4, chapter 1, which is sloka 4 and sloka 5. Sloka 4 is the Brahma Chakra, sloka 5 in chapter 1 is the mighty river of Brahman. So they give you 2 back-to-back slokas that are a lot to consider. What's in a word? What's in a sentence? A lot, especially in the Vedantic tradition. So here, with just a few minutes, we'll just have time enough to end with one of our chants, which will end our whole period of 3 weeks here in Portland, and I will be back to see you all again in mid-February after our India pilgrimage that we're taking. So let's end here with our chant. Om Bhadram Karnibhihi Srinayama Devaha Bhadram Pasyema Akshabir Yajatraha Stirairangaish Tushtuvam Sastanuvir Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti na Indra Vrida Shravaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwadevaha Swasti nastarksho arishtanemihi Swasti no brihaspatir dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the universe with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.